Hello and welcome to episode number 36 of the Crisis Intelligence Podcast. Today is Sunday, February 8th, 2015. I'm Melissa Agnes, and this podcast is brought to you by Agnes Day. Let's talk crisis intelligence. Garth, welcome to the show. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about what you do?
Thanks, Melissa. Good to be here. Garth Rowan, based in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. The accent is a Belfast accent. Studied politics, philosophy, and law in my native Northern Ireland. Wanted to move back in the day. Now, law doesn't do that at all very well. So I went off into journalism, much more my persona. My personality was much more suited to that, I think. Worked as a reporter in Berlin in Germany, then over to Switzerland where I linked up with CNN International, spent some time with them in Atlanta, and then after that came to Canada for some reporting work. Left journalism and then went into high-stakes communications. Now doing lots of crisis preparation and training, and that's where we linked up almost 2 years ago now, hard to believe. I saw your blog and thought that lady has it figured. That's the future of crisis, and we have complementary skills, so we kind of blend our skills together for our simulations, the nature of today.
We do. I still remember I was sitting at my kitchen table when I got a pleasant call from Mr. Garth Rowan wondering if, hey, would I be interested in maybe doing some collaborative work? And of course, I am, and we've had the pleasure of working together for 2 years. It's been a lot of fun.
Hard to believe it's been that time, and we've done some fun stuff, and lots more to go, I hope, and certainly it seems that way from the calls that we get. And of course, simulations are one of the biggest things that we do together.
Yes.
So what a great chance for us to chat together to the folks today on this podcast about crisis simulation.
Absolutely. So I get a lot of questions around, how should we think about simulations? Should we think about simulations? If we want to do a simulation, can we do it internally? How do we do that? So you and I got to talking and we thought, well, hey, let's do a podcast on how to conduct a crisis simulation, which is the theme of the podcast today. And actually, I think it's going to be a really fun conversation and hopefully very informative for all of our listeners. So I thought that maybe we could start with what is a crisis simulation and why is it so valuable?
Why do we do an exercise? Exactly. Well, what we want to check out is this plan that hopefully we have developed, although that's not always the case, and we should get into that too. But hopefully this plan that we've developed is going to work. And do the people who are supposed to run this plan, do they know what the plan is? Can they demonstrate that they know it? And what's their coordination like with other members of their team and other teams? If you can put all those things together, that's a pretty useful thing to do.
Absolutely. I often say that, nobody ever wants to experience a crisis, but in a crisis, you really hope to have some form of experience. You want to work with a team who has some form of experience, that they have a knowledge of what they're doing and where they're going. And a simulation, in our experience, is the best way to give your team that experience, those skills, without having to actually experience a crisis. So that in itself is it's invaluable.
It is. And as you mentioned there, it is tough for these folks because they're not police, they're not fire, they're not in the army. They didn't sign up for heavy action necessarily, and they don't do this sort of stuff for a living. They're average folks in an organization doing what they do best, doing what they've been trained to do. And then we're asking them to stop everything, come out of their cubicle and touch this different world. And it's unfamiliar, and getting people into that mindset and getting them ready for that is tricky.
Absolutely.
And we have to take a lot of care with people when we do that, don't
and
we?
there's not just that, but you're absolutely right. So the team doesn't have experience. Unless they have experience in crisis, they don't have experience in crisis. And yet when a crisis strikes, the stakes are high. The energy is very high. Sometimes it can be negative because you're just panicked and you don't know what you're doing, or you don't know what your team is doing. So we try to erase all of that. And my goal personally always with a simulation is that technology, so there's tabletop exercises that have been around for forever. Garth, you know that?
Mm-hmm, sure.
And then now we have technology that we can actually use technology to help us better those skills. So we can simulate Twitter, we can simulate Facebook, we could have reporters calling in, we could simulate the news cycle with their articles and the rumors and the noise on social, and how do we listen and respond and make sure that our team is prepared for all of these crisis realities and challenges that we face today. It's so rewarding, and it's such a great, I love the word team building, because oh my goodness, Garth, when we leave a client after doing a simulation, the energy, the positive energy, and the form of the bonds that you form because you nailed this, or maybe you didn't, but you learn a whole lot from it. So it's just a very rewarding exercise.
And as you say, it's got to be fun. If it's not fun, or if people aren't set up for success, then it's not a valid exercise. It's not worthwhile doing, because we got to get people to focus up and be ready to perform in the real situation. And if you make it too horrible, or go too far, or push people too far at the beginning without the right training and without these step-up exercises that go before the simulation, and we'll say a little bit about those, but if you haven't got all that done and in place, it's asking a lot of people, and you can also destroy teams, and you can really knock people's self-esteem down terribly if you push them too far, and it turns into some sort of a witch hunt.
Yeah,
and we've lived those too, haven't we? And that's not a good situation.
No, that's an excellent point. So let's focus on when should you do a simulation, because I think that might halt people. So they might say, well, we don't have a plan, or we have a plan, we don't need a simulation, or we don't have a plan, we don't need a simulation. So when should you do a simulation?
Well, sometimes you just got to push people into doing a simulation. Certainly, if you're the sort of organization where you have high risk, and this is where your vulnerability audits would show what sort of risk you've got. If you're a really high organization, I mean, we've got some clients, and they certainly, when they get going on a very difficult and high risk operation, they'll be practicing once a month. And we've got some clients who maybe would practice once every couple of years, or maybe not even that. Depends on what they see their vulnerability to be. We've also had some clients, have we not, Melissa, who will say things like, we hire great people, and if something goes wrong, we expect great people to figure it out somehow. So therefore, we don't need a plan. And that's probably the scariest thing that we hear. But we have come across that, and there's nothing like a simulation to get senior executives on side and to show that you actually do need a plan.
Absolutely. So so when you're setting out to do a simulation, or if you're wondering, and you're absolutely right with all of that, Garth, when we get asked sometimes, okay, so for example, sometimes we'll get called in and somebody will say, okay, we have a plan, we want to test it. Great, let's do a simulation. Or we don't have a plan, we think that we need a plan, but we're not really sure where our skills are, or where we're at, or how to get that plan going, or what we should focus on. Great, hey, let's do a simulation. Let's start and get a point of assessment so that we can see exactly where your skills are and what we can do to improve upon them. So I guess the answer is that a crisis simulation, no matter where you're at, as long as you're doing it for the right reasons, where you want to hone the skills, you want to give experience to your team, you want to strengthen some vulnerabilities, some weaknesses, a simulation is a really great tool to do that.
You need to do that for sure. And the way to start off is to put together a team to develop it, like an internal team. Got to get a team leader, and then they will either do it themselves, or they'll get folks in to do it, like ourselves, who can help them out. We like to have 8 weeks lead time from the day we initiate the project to the actual simulation, because there's a lot of things that have to get taken care of. And maybe the biggest part, we should talk about this, Melissa, is just agreeing what's to be tested exactly and getting the right scenario to do that.
So that's the very first step, actually.
That's tough, yeah. So it sounds like it should be kind of straightforward, but when you pick into it and you start pulling it apart, and you need to get all the other buy-ins, and of course it's got to be a plausible scenario. So you got to get, if it involves a share price, you've got to get an insider from IR to help you with that. If there's government relations involved, GR's got to be in there. IT needs to make sure things make sense, and operations, an ops person to correct any ops procedures that you might be going into. So all that takes time, because these are folks who are doing these development projects, and they are doing it almost on the side of their desk. They've got their other job to take care of as well. And this is an add-on piece. So it's good to leave yourself plenty of time. Kind of hard to pull these things together well at the last minute.
Absolutely. So you have a team, you decide that you want to do a simulation. The first thing, just to clearly outline this stuff for listeners, the first thing you want to do is figure out what you're going to test, because there's so many different things that you could test. I mean, we've had, you and I, Garth, we've had energy clients come and say, yes, we're an operational-based company, but we don't want to test operations. We've tested operations before. We want to test our ability to maintain a reputation when our share price drops.
Absolutely, yeah. There's those ones as well, and for great reasons too. Because once you bring in other sections of an organization, the complication factor goes up, and you get a complication multiplier, and everything just takes longer, and there's more everything to get your head around. So if you want to do something inside your own department's scope, it's good to nail it down, refine it, but also make it as real as possible. So you need insiders from those other organizations. And
another thing is that when it's easy maybe to think about it, but so when you start digging down, so once you have your goal, we want to test, for example, we want to test communications. We want to test our ability to position our organization as the voice of credibility and leadership and calm in a crisis. So that's what we're testing. We're not testing everything else. You want to focus in on what you want to test. Once you figure that out, then you're going to start brainstorming, okay, what kind of crisis would allow us to test this? What kind of scenario? And that's when you start running into those issues. Sometimes you can come up with a scenario, you think, wow, that's a wonderful scenario. That is exactly what we're looking for. It's totally plausible. And then you start getting into the details, because it's in those details that lies a very good simulation, a really great exercise. It's in those details. So when you start getting into the details, how, when, where, what, why, escalation points, what if it went this way, what if it goes that way, is when you start realizing a lot of the time, how many times did that happen to us, Garth, where we're like, oh, okay, scratch that one, that doesn't work. Yeah. On to the next scenario, which is why you need the time. And then just to stress your point earlier, where then it's, okay, so we're going to, at some point, share price is going to drop. Well, let's call, Tony from the investor relations department and ask him, at this point, what would you guys be doing? What can our team expect you guys to be doing? And is somebody available on the day of to maybe prompt something? Maybe you could come and tell the team this, that you've discovered this, or if they ask a question that you'll be there to answer. So you want to make sure that you have moving factors, the different areas that the simulation or that the exercise touches, and you want to try to get as many people on board and partaking to make it as realistic as possible. But another thing is that those people can't be people that are actually taking part in managing the simulation.
No, that would be akin to cheating a little bit, wouldn't it? Because they know the answers.
Exactly.
So, we can't have that. Although they are valuable on the day, of course, because they're part of the control team with us, and they're useful in so many other ways. But yeah, it is so important to do all this, because what we're trying to achieve here is we're trying to bring reality into a room without the pain of reality. And of course, it is worth saying, just in case people get worried, Melissa, that everything that we do in a simulation, it's in a closed circuit. So even though we're
Very
mentioning that
important.
we use all these social media tools, it does not leave the building. For sure, for sure.
Absolutely.
But we are bringing reality into that room, and so we've got to get it as tight as we possibly can.
Yep.
And that's where the content creation comes in, and that's where once we've got the scenario signed off, approved, that's where a lot of our work kicks in, and we start building the tweets, get the Facebook posts up, get the blogs going, newspaper articles online, simulated websites, YouTube video creation, you name it, we can put your name in there. And that's the exciting part for us, of course, is building all this. I mean, what I love, and I know this is very much your world, it's the characters that we build to do the exercises.
You do love your characters.
I love those characters. I love those characters. I love the yoga couple who are deep into environmental issues, very, very sincere folks. But it's what we like to build, though, is the backstory to these folks. So their following compared to, say, somebody who's blogging for Mashable they're a reporter for Bloomberg or Reuters, what their following is and what their interests are, and so we can show the team being tested, how their material is being picked up and retweeted, for example.
Absolutely.
And people love that.
One thing that people do love that, and actually brings me to an important point, I think, or it makes me think of an important point. One thing that is very important whether you're planning a simulation internally or if you're, contracting out to a service provider, one thing that you want to look for is to make sure that speak to your team first. So, for example, if you're not in charge of social media for your company, but your social media team will be actively part of this simulation because, of course, they need to help on some with the front line and communicating, then speak with them first. Ask them, what are the things that you've been taught or that you would look for? Would you look at, for example, these backstories? Would you look at what would you need to tell you what the influence of a person is? Do you look at the influence? What does influence mean to you? How does that play a role in when and how you respond? So my point is that it's important to understand the different roles within your own organization's teams in a crisis so that you can make sure that when you're developing this scenario, that it has the backstories, that it has all of the features and all of the things that your team needs to do their job properly in order to make it as realistic as possible.
Yeah, and I never forget there's an operations gentleman who came in to the communications exercise as an observer, just to see how things would go, and hadn't been involved in the planning. And because he was an observer, we could share with him some of the scenario, and we showed him some of the online materials. And he just stopped in his tracks when he saw it, because he thought, how did you do this? How did this happen? Is this real? Oh my God. And we scared him somewhat.
The power of technology.
Yeah, because he wasn't ready for that, and he went quite pale when he saw it. But that was good to know, because it just shows you how some folks can react to a very heavily simulated and reality-driven exercise.
Which is great, because you actually get that experience. As close as you can get to reality, the more the more your team is going to take away from the experience.
That's so true. And not just social media. We should also mention that when folks are doing this themselves, bring in other role players. Get people on the phone. Give them scripts. Give them characters on the phone, just like we have the characters in our social media arsenal. You can get other characters going for phone players.
Absolutely.
And they phone in and challenge the team and keep them going, testing. And what's great for us to see is when we put a prompt and we put to drive the scenario further, because we know what we've pushed into the system, to see how that comes out when the external prompters phone in and get from, say, external media relations, when they get the responses from them, to see where they actually are and how it's been interpreted, and if anything got broken in the transfer of the information, and what subtleties were seen or were not seen.
Absolutely. So we're talking about all of these different prompts and these different angles. You have social, you have people calling in. They can be anything. They can be reporters calling in for quotes. They can be, or to check facts. They can be, government relations, investors. They can be people calling in with questions. Whatever. The important thing is that when you're developing your scenario, to actually work forwards and work backwards and ask yourself all of the plausible questions. What would potentially be happening at this point? Would people be calling in? Who would be calling in? What would they be asking? So that you can really get a well-rounded scenario, and that you can kind of foresee. Part of your task as developing this simulation, this exercise, is to actually enable yourself to see all of the different angles, and you need to be prepared. So you just mentioned, Garth, that you never really know how something may be perceived or interpreted, or maybe you send an inject out and it's taken a different way than you thought. You have to be prepared for that, because you need to be prepared to react to the team who's responding and reacting in the crisis.
I think that's why it's also very important for people, like if folks are doing it themselves, have enough capacity that you can be in the room, be at the team briefings. I mean, we love to eavesdrop, don't we, at the team briefings, so we can hear how they are interpreting the material that's been injected into the scenario. It's driving it, and what their conclusions are. And sometimes, I mean, if it's going very well, then we can maybe throw in some extra injects to slow them down a little bit. Or if it's not going so well, they're not getting it, then we can slow down the prompting and lighten their load somewhat. And if necessary, and folks should be prepared to do this, sometimes you just got to stand up in the middle of the meeting and say, folks, for clarity, let me just bring you a little bit further, because you're off the point here somewhat.
Because we have to remember that some people might be thinking, well, that's cheating. But you only do it at a point where you know that if you don't do it, the scenario, the goal that you're trying to achieve is going to be derailed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you can let people chase a red herring for maybe half an hour, but for half a day, it's a waste of people's time.
Absolutely. And sometimes you just go on a roll, don't you? While you're in the room, while you're in the middle of all of this and all the commotion and figuring out the pieces, and you don't know what's going on, you can us as the observers, we can often see sometimes when things are just going down that wrong direction, and they just need to be brought back so they can focus on achieving the mission.
Yeah. Exactly, because we know at the end of the day, we're very clear on what the intent is to test.
Yes.
And if we're rolling off in a different angle and we're not testing what we came to test, then that's a waste of everybody's effort and money.
Which actually brings to a really very important point, actually. So the people that are on your team who are helping you develop the scenario, who are not going to be actively partaking in the exercise, it's very important that those people, the one or two at the very least, be present, like you were just saying, Garth, in the rooms. I mean, part of our role and this is where the second half of the real value comes in, is having people observe, people who understand what the objective was and who are actually observing how the management of the crisis is unfolding, so that later in the debriefing, when people are trying to put pieces together and figure out, really assess what just happened, what they went through, let it register, let it process. You actually have people who were onlookers who can say, okay, so when, for example, say the crisis didn't get managed as well as you would have hoped. It happens often. And
Sure.
Actually, that's really great. It's not a negative. It's a really positive thing, because thank goodness it wasn't a real crisis, and next time you'll be better prepared.
Yeah, now we know.
We know. But in the moment, when you're in the heat of the moment, when you're part of the team that's actively taking part in this exercise, you don't pinpoint. You know at the end that you didn't achieve the mission, but you don't pinpoint why or how it didn't get achieved. The people who are observing can then say, it happened, the disconnect, the broken telephone, for example, happened at this point, and here's why, and this is maybe what we need to focus on improving within our plan.
Yeah, that's so much. That's so true. It is the thing that breaks down the room. And there's always a point where you go, they're missing it. Mm-hmm. They've gone past it, or they've made an assumption that they shouldn't have made.
Or it could be anything. I mean, the last recently, you and I did one, and I remember, oh my goodness, I was so proud of the team, and it was a 4-hour-long exercise. It was a really, really big crisis. It was really big. Not exercise, but scenario. I mean, this scenario was a really brilliant one and really complex and big goal to achieve. And halfway through, maybe 2.5 hours through, they got it. The team knew exactly what needed to be done to resolve this crisis. And I remember sitting there going, wow, they got it. There's still an hour and a half left of this, an hour and a half left of the simulation. And man, they're going to be done in like 45 minutes. Kudos to them. And then, and they got permission. So the team got the write-off, the consent, the permission of their superiors to actually go and do whatever they needed to do to resolve the crisis. An hour later, it hadn't been done. And if you asked them why, they'd say, well, maybe they wouldn't know. But for us, we could see that they were hung up on the wording. And when it comes to social media, if we don't answer in real time, especially when we know the answers, then it's going to continue to escalate. And by us being in the room, so by having somebody in the room who's observing this, and if you're lucky, if you do your job well, you can also, if you have the right tools and everything, you can also have somebody in the room who's actually putting in injects at the same time, so you're feeding off of the people that you're observing. And so my point is that an hour later, they hadn't resolved the crisis yet when I was sure they'd have it resolved within 45 minutes. They weren't even close. So we got to turn up the heat a little bit to show them, well, hey, if you may have the answers, but back on the public side of things are cranking up. Why aren't you responding? And later in the debriefing, we got to tell them that, yes, you need to focus on the right wording when you're coming out with your official response. But when you're responding on social, don't get hung up on one word. Don't spend an hour on one word and let the crisis escalate even further. So there's so many different lessons that you can take out of this type of exercise, but in order to find those real lessons and to really improve upon them, you need to have somebody in the room tasked with the observing role.
You must have that. And as you say, on that particular one, it got into what we were terming meeting churn. So the meeting, people know what to do, but more prompts come in to the meeting, and the meeting actually never ends. So people don't get off and do what they need to do, and that's one of the toughest things I think that we've seen over the time we've been working together for crisis communication simulations. It's the having that tight meeting, and how do you get that briefing process tight so that you don't get the never-ending meeting. And that's something we should talk about, perhaps about the steps of getting that briefing process tight.
Absolutely.
And folks, if you're doing it yourself, here's what we've learned in our time. So you need a process person, someone from the team, maybe a deputy leader, but someone who's there to keep the time. So you decide that there's going to be a certain time. We like no more than 2 minutes for each person who's going to speak. Then you want the leader to say to folks, hey, folks, stop what you're doing. We're going to have a meeting. And then everybody's got between 1 or 2 minutes max to sum up their area. And this is important, as it relates exclusively to the current focus. So what are we doing right now? Because what happens in meetings, and we see it all the time, is that people bring other elements into the meeting and knock off the focus. The leader has to keep track of that focus, and you can do that by saying things like, well, how does this relate to what we're trying to do currently? Can it be dealt with between you and me offline? And making sure that you hold everybody to their 2 minutes. When you tell people you got 2 minutes, and they focus their thoughts down beforehand, and they can stick themselves to it and don't get carried away. After the whole thing's finished, people have said their bit. The leader sums up. and says, have I missed anything? Am I wrong in any way here? If no, move forward with the plan. If yes, supply the leader with more information. And there should be no move forward, though, without a confirmed focus for the next section. And then the leader takes whatever has to be taken offline to allow the team to go back to what they were doing, to move on and do what needs to be done. And that's the vital point. That's where people get so messed up that they stay, they keep everybody in the meeting, and what needs to be done doesn't get done.
What we've really seen, actually, because we've seen, you're absolutely right, we've seen this time and time again of it's so easy, especially when you have people coming in with new information, you have people leaving the room, other people coming in the room, you have people calling in. It's very hard to stay on track when every minute counts. And one thing that we've noticed that really helps, and this we add it to crisis plans because of it, is to have somebody whose role in these meetings, say the leadership meeting is going to take place every 30 minutes. So the leaders want an update and then to make decisions. Have somebody whose role in the crisis is to simply keep track of time. It's been a half an hour, we need to call that meeting. It's been 10 minutes, everybody go off to do their own thing, to actually go and implement what we've just approved. Because time ticks, and it ticks fast. It ticks so quickly, and you get so caught up in the moment, and everything that everybody is saying feels so important that it's very, very easy to get derailed.
That is a huge part of the whole simulation, and it's tough to be the leader because you're not the commander of a SWAT team here. People didn't sign up for to be cut off, and there's a lot of personality types, understandably, do not like the conflict which there almost inevitably is going to be in those meetings. Certainly for folks who are not used to the punctuality which you must throw into that sort of a structure. And there's some, if folks want to read about it themselves, we would recommend, would we not, Melissa, the work of Ken Thomas and a fellow called Ralph Kilman. And they have a handling conflict structure, which is very, very useful. And you'll find your own personality in there. The personalities range from the A1 leader, the compete personality, the compromiser, the accommodator, the collaborator, and the avoider. And every team's got people whose personalities are made up of all these items, and all of them, every one of them, have the pros and the cons, and you want to make sure that you balance things out. We have seen some meetings whereby people are told basically to shut up, and they sulk after that. They don't like it. They were hurt. They were offended.
Well, nobody likes that.
Nobody likes that. Nobody likes that. But sometimes when people are off track, you have to cut them off. And it's what's useful to do is a drill beforehand, or in your build up to doing these simulated exercises. Do some drills, and FEMA is great for that. So if you go to the FEMA website, FEMA website, you'll get all the orientation and the drills and the tabletops, functionals, full scales. You get the whole structure of exercises there. But a drill in how to run a meeting and how to cut people off, so they're used to being cut off, they're used to being held to account on time, and it's not personal, and they're not supposed to take offense. But what you don't want is for people to clam up and not be playing in the scenario, or playing worse still, playing in the real situation, because they didn't like the way they were spoken to, for heaven's sake.
Yeah.
But it's natural. I mean, this is not what people normally do, and it can get a little bit rough sometimes in the war room.
It's also, that brings up a good point of, so that's one side of it, keeping people on track. I do believe, and in my experience, that if you have, which is actually another topic that I want to dive into after, when you plan for these types of simulations, and this is planning for a crisis, so it counts, but to go through the rules, to let your team know what they can expect, what their responsibilities are, what the goal is, what time allotted for meetings and conversations and different things like that. So at least on one side, you let them know that it's time sensitive, or that you're expecting certain things. The other thing that you would learn is, if you do have a leader that tells somebody to shut up, in my opinion, that's not a great leader. So one, you want to test your leaders, and two, you also want to make sure that you have people leading a crisis who aren't going to damage the reputation of the organization because they have a hot head and they exploded at key members of their team and offended them.
And what a great thing to catch in a simulation.
Absolutely.
As opposed to getting everybody bent out of shape on the real day. And that's why we do the simulations, to see, okay, why did it go off rails there? Why did somebody get all hot and excited? And why were people taking too long to say their piece as well? So it plays both ways, doesn't it?
Absolutely, it really does. And I love the thought of leaders learning different personality types, because when you're leading an organization, when you're a leader in a crisis, whatever, any leader needs to really understand the different types of people that they will have to lead, that they will have to work with, and that they will have to empower, because a good leader, a strong leader, empowers their team. So understanding personality types helps you do that.
You need to understand the personality types, because sometimes you're going to get those people with the A personalities who want to do everything. They have the plan and they're going to go for it, and maybe they're bringing no one along with them. So that's not all that good. The avoider might have the best answer to the whole situation, but because they don't like the way things are going in the room, they're just sitting quietly and they're waiting to be asked. And so you really got to understand your people and understand yourself as well. So all that comes out in the debrief, and you've got to be careful in the debrief, as with any part of the organization. You're dealing with people's personalities, with their egos. So we always like to start off the debrief with what worked.
Yes,
what went well,
positive.
And if there's not a lot that went well, then we're going to find the things that went well, and we're going to bring those out. And then you get into what needs improvement, and you want to make sure that you do that just after the exercise. You want a hot debrief where you get the instant thoughts, because that's when people are the most ready to hear information. They're focused, they're psyched, it's all fresh. Capture that as best you can. Have a scribe, get as much time as you possibly can, because that's where the real learning comes from. Yes. I think it's in the debrief. Why do things play out the way they did? What could we do differently? What was the nature of that particular prompt? What did we miss? How do we miss it? It all comes out then. And then after the debrief, then there needs to be the cold eyes review, when you go through the whole thing and really help people along, tweak the plan if there's something wrong with the plan. If there's something wrong with the way people performed, then now's the time to bring in more training for that person to get them up to their role.
Absolutely. And a good simulation tool will archive all of the communications that were released to the simulated public during the crisis. So take the time later to review those informations, review those communications. Where are some strengths? Where are some, what can you pull from this to get your team to be able to communicate even stronger? I really do agree, Garth, that the exercise, a crisis simulation, we've seen it, it's invaluable, but it's in the debrief that the real learning, that the aha moments emerge. Because in the heat of the moment, during that 4-hour simulation, you're in it. Your head is in it. You are focused. You're focused on your mission. You're focused on whatever role you play in the crisis, and you need to be in it. But on the debrief, you're able to process everything that you experienced, everything that you watched, the results that came. You're able to discuss with your team where energies are flying high. So it's a really great energy atmosphere, and to figure out, to really digest what just happened and take the learnings from it. You made an excellent point that there needs to be a scribe. Somebody needs to be responsible, just like in the scenario, in the exercise, somebody needs to be responsible for just simply listening and jotting down all of the things that are being spoken about in the debrief, because while those energies are running high, once you cool down, you're going to forget a lot of it. And there's some valuable learnings there.
True enough. And also in the moment, the more realistic the simulation is, the easier it is to lose track of time. Mm-hmm. So people say, wow, what? We're lunchtime already? Where did the morning go? how did that happen? Because once you're in, you're full in it, and the tighter the simulation, the more realistic, the easier it is to lose track. That's why with technology now, isn't it wonderful that you can give people the entire event and all the things that they did, all the prompts that they did with a time code on them, and so they'll see how long it took them to respond to a certain simulation to the last second.
All of this, the whole exercise is just, it's shaped to be, and it needs to be shaped. So this is a really big point that I'd like to stress. When you're conducting a crisis simulation, it's about testing. It's not about, especially in the debrief. So just like I said, that emotions can run or are running high, energy is running high, energy is running high, emotions can run high too. So if the simulation wasn't managed as successfully as you might have thought, and you're pinpointing out why, what's really important is to not conduct a witch hunt. It's not to, and I remember personally, you and I, we had done a simulation. The team didn't manage it as well as we expected them to. They were feeling a little bummed at the end of it, and that's normal. Yep. And I remember somebody telling me afterwards saying, I really thought that you were going to blast this one person because it kind of unraveled because of that one person. But never did we even mention that person in the debrief. What was the most important thing was to figure out, okay, let the team understand what happened, make sure that they understood and that they agreed on what happened. And it wasn't that person's fault. If anything, it is always, you go fall back on the plan. What's wrong with the plan? How come that broken telephone, for example, happened? What's wrong with the plan? Maybe that person's role has too many tasks attached to it. Maybe he's not the right person for the role. That's possible too. But if the plan isn't solid, you never know who's going to have what role, because in the heat of the moment, somebody might call in sick and you might get somebody else to fill in that role, and they have to, kind of ad hoc it on the fly, understand what their tasks are. So it's very important that you shape everything as a learning experience, as a test without a grade, and that you look at things and figure out not you screwed up, but how come that communication didn't get to the person that it was supposed to get to? What's wrong with the whole layout of the plan that we have that didn't allow that to happen? So it's really important that you watch in the debriefing how you shape your messages.
And also to ask what happened to the training or the lack thereof that put this person in that role, whereby they didn't have the skill set to carry out the role adequately. So that's where multidiscipline training is very useful to come into. As you say, sometimes when people have the exercises, or even on the real day, you're not going to get everybody in the role they thought they were going to get. Sometimes you got to take on several roles.
I remember one time
we
arrived in the morning of a simulation, and the lady that we were working with for the whole development of the exercise said, well, 5 people called in sick today. Do you remember?
Yeah. That was interesting. We thought, okay, this will be different.
We had to find people, or they had to find people to still fill in those roles because the simulation, the exercise needed to take place. Which actually brings me to a question that I'm sure people are wondering. Who should take part in this type of exercise?
Well, the folks that should take part in it are whoever's mentioned in the plan, whoever should be there to make approvals. And if you need executives to have a look at what's going on, then certainly executives should be there to see what's unfolding and where their approvals are required or not required.
Absolutely. And remember, again, when you're developing the scenario, and when you've the first part there is to identify the objective, the goals and the objective of the mission. Who do you need to meet that objective? So if IR is playing a role, do you need somebody from IR? Is it only the communications team? Are you going to do a mock? Are you going to end the simulation with a mock press conference? In which case your spokesperson should be there. So it really depends on what you're testing, and the grand scheme of the scenario, of the simulation, of the scenario, I suppose. So let's talk about something quickly that I think is probably important for people to just know behind the scenes. The day of the exercise, So we've talked about planning for the exercise, developing the scenario, who should be involved, conducting the debriefing, all of these things. There's a couple things that we've learned, haven't we, Garth, where we kind of get to know how we should prepare the team, because a crisis simulation, you want the team that you're testing to have all kinds of surprises that they have to manage their way out of. What you don't want is to be surprised on the day of. So we talked about people calling in sick. You need to plan for if that were to happen. What other things have we saw through our experience of different things? Making sure that people understand their roles, their responsibilities, and also the technology. So if you're using a platform that they've never used before, maybe talk to them, get together in a meeting the day before and kind of introduce the platform and how it works, so that doesn't set people back.
Yeah, make sure that if you're moving laptops and a whole bunch of people to a room they've never worked in before, that everything's gonna work out okay. That they're gonna get onto the intranet from that location. That everything's going to work with everything else. Like phone systems work. People know the codes to get onto different platforms. You want to set them up for success. On the control side, on our side, you want to make sure that you've got more than enough options.
Yes.
For all the twists and turns, because people always surprise you. That somebody takes something in a different way and you go, wow, interesting that they saw it like that. Now they're off in this different route, kind of interesting route. But wow, we can deal with that too. Here's some other prompts to take them down a good workout for that road. So having plenty of scope and plenty of options is pretty good. And really important is keeping things positive all the way through. It should be fun. It doesn't always seem like fun on the day, but it can be still stressful. But it should be good stress, not
it should.
Not the other stuff.
You're focusing on empowering your team, on helping them be better communicators, on helping them understand instinctively, what needs to be done to protect the organization that you proudly work for. It is a positive experience. It should be a positive experience. I'd also add that, every part of this exercise is a test. And so test your equipment that you would use in a crisis. Test your rooms that you would use in a crisis. If you have an EOC or a conference room where this is your command central dedicated, written in the plan that you would be, located in a crisis, use that room. Garth, how many times have we seen people say, you know what, after this simulation, our room's not big enough.
Yeah. I know. That happens so often. Our room's not big enough, or we're too far away from our other teammates. Or we're in the wrong floor.
Yeah, or the thing that actually, I remember one time it happened, and it really stuck with me because I was so proud of the team for realizing this. But they said our room, and it was a pretty big room. I mean, it's a conference room for about maybe 20 people. And they said our room isn't big enough, and that caused a psychological barrier where even though we knew that we needed to be calling people in to talk to us, we were calling them on the phone, which doesn't give the same effect. And we were doing that, or we just weren't asking them to come in and talk to us face to face because we felt restricted. That's right. A big thing in a crisis. If you need to be face to face to somebody, you need to be face to face to somebody. You don't want to have psychological barriers because of the space that you're in.
So true. It's one thing to get an email from people who are working the social media. It's another thing to see the whiteness of their face because they realize as to how grim the situation is looking, and you only get that when you look at them in the room. And
actually, what you just said, that has in the past made or break the resolution of a crisis. The resolution, whether it's a crisis.
I was going to say, that breaks the significance.
Exactly.
Doesn't it? I mean, people go, wow, this person thinks this is a really huge deal.
And
I better stop and listen.
Yeah. No, it's so important. And I guess my last little note of, getting the day together, making sure that everything goes smoothly and just lessening the risks as much as possible before you actually get onto exercise day. Plan to feed your people. A 4-hour exercise plus a debriefing is a long time. They need fuel.
They do, and good fuel.
Good fuel.
We all need good fuel,
yes.
and also the debrief that can go on a long ways afterwards. There can be a lot of one-on-one meetings in people's offices, cups of coffee. Hey, beers and nachos afterwards is not a bad idea for team building as well. To talk the whole thing through.
That so true. So true. The whole point of a crisis simulation is to prepare and prevent crisis, strengthen the communications and just all of the skills of your teams, and build a team. Build a team that you want to work with in a crisis. Gain experience with them so that you know what their strengths and weaknesses are. You know how you work together. You know that if you're focusing on doing this, that they're focusing on doing that, because you've worked together so often, even in these high-stakes situations where you just know what each other's thinking and you know what you're doing. It's funny. It brings me to sailing, and I think that's the biggest sense of team. Personally, I have this team that I sail with. We learn to sail together. We sail around the world in different areas together all the time, and there's nothing like getting a gust of big wind or being in the rain with this heavy wind and knowing that my team, I'm doing what I have to do, and feeling so confident that my team is doing what they have to do so that we can navigate this boat peacefully, safely. Same thing in a crisis. You want to build that experience with your team so that you can rely on each other, depend on each other, trust each other, and just be able to manage a crisis and salvage your organization's reputation and bottom line.
Yeah, we've never seen a great crisis team that wasn't great at everything else. If you're good at crisis, the rest of the stuff falls into place.
It's communication.
Yeah, and the team structure's there,
yeah.
And there's trust, and there's learning, and there's cross functional knowledge. People can step in, help each other out. People can do each other's jobs, and that's what you get out of building, putting the effort into a great crisis team. So it's not just about the crisis; it's about everything else that team is going to do in an organization.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Garth, anything that you'd add on how to conduct a crisis simulation that you think that we might have missed? Or
I think we've got it all there, Melissa. I think we can talk about the other types of exercises sometime. We can talk about the step through, the orientation, the tabletop, all the things that you need to do in advance. What you don't want to do is get people doing a big simulation like we're talking about now before they can walk. Mm-hmm. You've got to pace the thing along. But when you can,
or just throw them in and watch them.
Watch them try to swim and see if they can swim. That can be kind of painful, and you may not get many people showing up for your next exercise if you do that. That's a trouble.
Very true. That's very true.
But yeah, I think we've got lots of things that we can come back some other day and talk about in other podcasts.
Sounds like fun. And speaking of fun, when you just remember that when you do conduct your crisis simulation, it's supposed to be a fun exercise, and it has so many. Having fun in that exercise is so rewarding for so many different areas of the business.
Yeah, I never met a team that didn't work well and then take it into other aspects of their world and into other jobs too. If you're known to be on a great crisis team, the word gets out. I mean, some companies do it a lot better than others, and when you're in the biz, people know who's good.
Yep, that's true. Garth, this has been a fun conversation talking about something that we're both so passionate about. Where can people find and follow you for more information, for more of your good stuff?
Well, I'm based in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And you can get me at garth@beready.ca. Be Ready is the company. And I'm also on your website.
You are, and you blog for my blog on occasion.
I do, and I pod for your cast.
That you do. Very good, Garth. Thanks so much for having this fun conversation.
Okay, take care, Melissa.
Thank you
you for tuning in and listening to this week's episode of the Crisis Intelligence Podcast with me, Melissa Agnes. I release a new episode every Sunday, so if you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe to this Crisis Intelligence Podcast on iTunes or Stitcher so you don't miss out on any future episodes. While you're at it, feel free to leave me a rating or review on iTunes. This will go such a long way in helping me get this important information to more people just like you to help benefit their crisis management and crisis communications. Additionally, if you'd like to have me come and speak at an upcoming event that you may be organizing, I'd be happy to have a conversation with you. You can email me at melissa@melissaagnes.com. Thanks so much for tuning in this week, and I look forward to talking even more crisis intelligence with you next Sunday.